We got a lot to get into today, not the least of which is quarterback talk that I'm particularly interested in. But before we do all of that, let's start with the remnants of the Super Bowl, C-Rob, because I'm trying to figure out, now that we've had a few days to compartmentalize what we saw, what the right reaction. Like, I have a hard time sitting here saying the world is falling apart for the Chiefs. They got their ass kicked for one game, but they got their ass kicked for one game. So what's the right way to look back at all this?
Well, look, it's the season of change, I think, for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't think, the one thing I think that hasn't changed from sitting there watching it unfold, the thing that was obvious to me over the course of that game was just how outclassed the offense was. We can sing the praises of the Philadelphia Eagles, Howie Roseman, the general manager, how he built the defense, the multitude of not only impactful players, but depth that I think the Philadelphia Eagles showcased in that Super Bowl was really of paramount importance, at least for the Eagles, particularly when you consider the potential cap trouble that's coming and the young players that are really comprising that defense. But I think when I sat there and I looked at the Chiefs, I said, okay, Travis Kelce, one of the worst games he's had in his career. And I think that the film breakdown post Super Bowl kind of, it supports that. Like Kelce was getting out of his, at the snap, he was getting out of his stance slow. He was moving slow. He had a couple of drops. It was a rough game for Travis Kelce. So I think there's a reason why he's contemplating retirement right now for the Kansas City Chiefs. So you're talking about there's an impactful player that potentially has to be replaced. I think will have to be replaced, whether he retires or not. I think now you have to find a number one option on that offense beyond Travis Kelce moving into 2025. The wide receivers look like a group where it's a collection of parts, and you got by on that for a while. I think that era is over. Now you need a true number one. If Rashee Rice comes back, obviously from injury, and he's the guy, okay, that's potentially an answer. I still think you need a high-level number two. I think the running back room, although you could say, well, the way the Super Bowl played out, Kareem Hunt really couldn't have an impact. Isaiah Pacheco. Look, there's a need for a high level, running back, I think, in the backfield. And then the offensive line, there's no question in any of our minds after watching that game that the whole mix and match nature of the offensive line, hey, maybe we move Joe Thuney around. He can play every position on the offensive line at some point. No, you have to resolve that. It's an overhaul, I think, from the Chiefs' offensive standpoint, and there's a lot of work to be done. I don't think it's a one season makeover. I think this is the start of, at bare minimum, probably a 2-year process of really adding pieces for that Chiefs offense. And to me, that was really the big takeaway from the Chiefs that I think is absolutely real. You're entering the era of, at the very least, a mini rebuild around Pat Mahomes and the offense.
I'm just, man, I don't want to be too hard on the Chiefs here because, again, they just lost the Super Bowl. But there's this part of me where, C-Rob, like, we've seen that story before. Chiefs offensive line gets whooped in the Super Bowl, they lose. Like, right. How do you let that happen again? Like, it's still so fresh in the minds of, like, is there a spot here where it's fair to say the Chiefs are not doing a great job of identifying the right talent on the offensive line as a consistent issue for this team?
I don't want to say that. I mean, look, it's every NFL team, and I'll give the Chiefs this grace. Every NFL team, once you have offensive line problems and the season has started, once you have offensive line problems and it's not March, it's not April, it's not May, it's really hard to fix offensive line problems in real time unless you have, and this is a tip of the cap to the Philadelphia Eagles. Unless you have Jeff Stoutland as your offensive line coach, and he's a one of one. Every single team in the NFL would love to have a Jeff Stoutland. Unless you have a Jeff Stoutland, I don't know that you think, hey, the guys we have in the building, the guys we have in the offensive line room are going to get significantly better from March, April, May to July, August, September, October, there's not enough in terms of the coaching, the elite level coaching that happens in Philadelphia. There's not enough of those guys to go around. I remember at one point I had an AFC executive who told me they think that this was last offseason. They said that they think that Stoutland is, if there's the importance of head coach, if there's importance of general manager, if there's importance of owner, they think the only assistant who's not a coordinator who rises to the level of making or breaking a team is Jeff Stoutland. That's it. He's the one guy in the NFL beyond your coordinators and your owner and your head coach and your general manager who can actually affect the status and the horizon of your team once you get past March, April, May, which is, March, April, May, June, July, when you're really adding pieces to that offensive line. And, the Chiefs don't have him. It's a reality. Every team would love to have Stoutland. He's in Philadelphia for a reason. They're paying him what they're paying him for a reason. They value him the way they value him for a reason. They know that 31 other franchises would love to have him. The Chiefs don't have that. So once you have those offensive line issues, once you're sitting there and looking at Joe Thuney and saying, okay, well, he's our guard. Can we make him into a tackle? Once you're making those adjustments, you can't really get out of that box, particularly if you're making the adjustments and it's not working really well. And to go back again with Travis Kelce, I think probably the most frustrating part of tape that he's watching post Super Bowl is some of the run pickups. He had to play a part in, some of the pass blocking or run pickups. He wasn't necessarily getting his job done. And, I think for the Chiefs that goes beyond just the offensive line. So it's an offensive line problem that I think is a long-term solution. It's going to take drafts, it's going to take free agency, it's going to take development, and I think it's going to go beyond 2025.
So, let me plant the flag of nuance here for a second, because I feel like what we do in the AFC particularly is like, oh, it's Lamar versus the Chiefs. It's Joe Burrow versus the Chiefs. It's Josh Allen versus the Chiefs. Like, to me, I was watching that Super Bowl, and ever since that Super Bowl, all I keep thinking about is we're obsessed with the wrong thing. Like, the way to beat the Chiefs is to knock the hell out of an offensive line that is not going to be able to stand up to it. Instead of sitting here obsessed over whether or not Joe Burrow can beat the Chiefs, we should be obsessed on whether or not the Bengals are ever going to build a defensive line that can attack that offensive line. Like to say, if I'm in the AFC West, every single one of these teams, instead of sitting here worrying about, oh, do we have the quarterback to compete with Mahomes? I'm looking at it saying, I will put every dollar I have, every free agent acquisition I have, every draft pick I have on building a defensive line that is deep and will just absolutely get after him, and we will trust that our defensive line can shut down the Chiefs. Though, look, not everybody has a Jalen Carter, but my God, see, Rob, like instead of worrying about whether or not Josh Allen can beat the Chiefs, we need to worry about whether the Bills can finally get the defensive line that can do to the Chiefs what we just saw happen.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's nice to say it, right? But I mean, let's be realistic about the Eagles. It wasn't 1 year of investment, right? This was a development over a few drafts, some free agency acquisitions, some development. That defensive line, and really it went beyond the defensive line. The front seven played very, very well. But, from a defensive line standpoint, I think the staggering thing that you watched, and I'm sure AFC teams would love to replicate, is a pass rush without blitzing. I mean, we would all love to be able to go, yeah, let's just count on our 4 players up front. We won't have to do anything exotic. We won't have to blitz anybody. We will count on the 4 we have to get a pass rush. It's rare, and not only is it rare, I would argue that in a 1-game scenario, you may be able to achieve it. I think eventually adjustments happen and it becomes less effective. So what I would say is if the Eagles and the Chiefs played that game 10 times, eventually the Chiefs are going to be able to adjust schematically to say, we're going to take away the ability for them to rush 4 and be able to get pressure without blitzing. In a one-game scenario, it's really hard to make those adjustments and be effective. Over a 10-game scenario, over a season scenario, when you're sitting there and you're breaking down Chiefs film, you can start to adjust the offense. Maybe you move the pocket. You design plays that maybe, just get Pat Mahomes away from the contain of really the offensive line that was failing in that game. So it's difficult to replicate over a season-long scenario. And the Chiefs now obviously know, okay, there's a little bit of a formula out here. We're going to attack it in free agency. We're going to attack it in the draft. We're going to do what we can to remix this offensive line setup. However, if that doesn't work schematically, we may now have to adjust some things for Patrick Mahomes to make sure that the pass rush cannot affect him without a blitz. And by the way, the Eagles, they're a pretty damn talented team. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of investment, that went into that defense, and very few teams I think that out there can replicate that. And so I don't know that's necessarily a formula as much as, hey, in one game scenario, the Eagles had the goods, they had the players, they had the scheme. The Chiefs could not adjust to it. They did not have the players. They did not have the scheme to adjust to it in a one-game scenario. And now moving forward, they're going to have to figure out a way to resolve that. I don't think it's a master formula for every AFC team cannot all of a sudden cook up the front. As you said, Jalen Carter getting to the Eagles, frankly, in that draft at the 10th overall pick is, had he not had off-field problems, we're talking about a player who gets drafted in the first 2 or 3 picks in the year that he came out. He fell to 10 for a reason. The Eagles rolled the dice on that pick. That made a big difference for them. Zach Bond, another player that you would think, the Eagles acquire him in free agency. Do we think he's going to be a first-team All-Pro? And ultimately that ends up happening. I mean, a lot of things went the Eagles' way. There's no doubt. I don't know that's really replicatable, for lack of a better word, by other AFC franchises.
That's fair. And look, I was covering the draft for ESPN the year Jalen was selected, and I covered it several years. It's the only time I ever had to pre-write a statement on a player that then ESPN research had to approve for me to have prepared for when Jalen Carter was selected. And I only say that because I want us all to keep a little bit of context to why Jalen Carter was available when he was available. Like, this was not a given for this young man. So I think that's a huge part. And look, to your point, C-Rob, like I hear you that the Chiefs are in this little mini rebuild of sorts. I don't think that changes. And they were in that rebuild, and still, the Bills couldn't get them. Still, the Ravens can't get the number of times that they've managed to get through these teams. So, I think the context here is it's a rebuild, but I'm not going to sit here and suddenly say that all is broken for the Chiefs when it comes to being the dominant team in the AFC again next year.
And not only that, Fitz. I mean, let's be honest. It's not like they lost to an inferior team. Over the balance of the season, we knew the Philadelphia Eagles were, if not the best team in the NFC, they were amongst the best 2 or 3. They were the healthiest team over the expanse of the season. Talent-wise, I sat there and I said, okay, well, the Chiefs are losing in this Super Bowl. It's difficult, but they didn't lose to a pretender in the NFC. Look at what the Eagles were operating. Let's get away from the defense. And by the way, I truly believe this was a Super Bowl that was won by defense. Jalen Hurts wins Super Bowl MVP only because there were so many players on defense.
Who are you giving it to on defense?
Exactly. Who are you giving it to? It's weird. He defaulted into the MVP award in the Super Bowl only because there was a multitude of defensive players, whether it's Josh Sweat, Cooper DeJean, there were multiple players defensively that you really could have really leaned into when it comes to voting for that Super Bowl MVP. But again, when you look at Philly, let's get away from the defense and let's talk about the offense. I mean, offensive line, superb. We've talked about that. Superbly coached, superbly talented. Saquon Barkley had one of the greatest running back seasons ever. Didn't even have to have the monster game in the Super Bowl to have that impact. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, there's tight end up. It's literally, when you sit there and you look at it, you go, yeah, they lost, but they lost to a badass NFC team. Like, it was built for this. They have talent for this, and it wasn't one-sided across the roster. The Philadelphia Eagles were stacked, and I think the only reason we ever doubted the Eagles was because we came in a year ago. You and I are talking about entering the offseason. We're going, what's going on with Nick Sirianni? What's going on with Howie Roseman, the front office and the head coach relationship, ownership? Are they going to change coaches? Like, why is this so shaky? That was really the reason why I think we questioned the Eagles. And that was before, obviously, if we're talking about February of 2024, that was before they added Saquon Barkley. And, so it's not, they didn't lose to an inferior team. They lost to the superior team in the NFC, and not just superior in one way, superior on both sides of the ball. I think we have to keep that in mind before we hit the panic button on the Chiefs and just say, this is it. This is the end of the dynasty. This is the end of the era. It's an adjustment period. I think it's fair to look at the Chiefs and say every dynasty, especially if you're comparing them to the New England Patriots, we all talk about how Brady had the gap, the Super Bowl gap, where it's like 10 years without winning a Super Bowl. Even the best franchises go through this. I think the Chiefs now they're paying the bill, frankly, of playing a lot of postseason games and having some age and having to make some adjustments.
Yeah, in Andy Reid, I trust long term. I'm sure they'll get it figured out, but I agree with you completely.
Let me ask you this though. It's interesting that you bring up Andy Reid. He committed to 2025. We know obviously he's going to be back for 2025. The one thing with the Chiefs that maybe, and I'm curious if you feel this way, the one thing with the Chiefs, when you look at the Patriots and that sustained dominance and Brady, he had Belichick for a really long time. That tandem existed for, basically 2 decades plus. Do we feel that way with the Chiefs? Are we sure that we feel like we can look at Patrick Mahomes and we can go, he's got 10, right? There's no doubt. Patrick Mahomes, there are 10 years there, right? Absolutely. I think we are settled looking at Patrick Mahomes and saying he can play to 40 and at a high level. Do you think Andy Reid will be there another 10 years for the Chiefs? That's the one question I have long term for the Chiefs, where I think they will not be able to match the Patriots, where you kept 2 individuals, a head coach and a quarterback, together for 20 plus years. I don't know if the Chiefs can match that with Reid and Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, what's Andy Reid, 66 right now? So, I mean, asking for another 10 years is asking him to go to 76 and still have a love for it. I think that's the interesting thing. I wasn't sure if they continued to just win Super Bowl after Super Bowl. I wasn't sure if there'd be a point where Andy Reid's like, you know what, good to go out on top. And so, part of me keeps making the same comment, but I just wonder if, did this just enrage the Chiefs a little bit and fire in the belly sort of thing? But I hear you. The chance of 10 more years, I think the argument is that when you've got Patrick Mahomes, it's a lot of fun. When you got Spags with you the whole time, you've got continuity in an organization, it's a lot of fun, but it's also a hell of a lot of work. So yeah, do I think the 10 years is remaining in front of Andy Reid? I'd be pretty surprised. I mean,
it's weird. I never really thought about it, but I don't remember in the middle of the the Patriots dynasty with Brady sitting there and going, were we asking Belichick these questions? Hey, you get to stick around. I don't ever remember after 10 plus years of Belichick, if we were sitting there going, are you going to be back next year? We just assumed it. We never thought, Belichick's not walking away. We never really questioned it in the middle. Whereas with Andy Reid, I think we do question it. It was a prominent question early in the Super Bowl. The last question I asked last year when they won it was literally the last question of the press conference. I asked Andy Reid was, are you going to be here in 2024? Are you going to be here through this season? And obviously he was, but I don't know that we can necessarily look at Andy Reid and say, yeah, he's absolutely going to be around with Patrick Mahomes 10 years from now.
That'll be the interesting. We're so used to the breakup of Brady and Belichick. eventually being the decision maker for, who was it? Was it Brady? Like all the stupid things that were debated. Right. But you're right. The inevitability of Patrick Mahomes being the Chiefs quarterback, but not having Andy Reid as his head coach is something that
we've never given the respect, I think, long-term to. We always looked at Brady and said, well, how many quarterbacks can play to 45? How many, we look at all these different factors, but I don't know that we've ever looked at the tandem aspect of it and said, how many coaches and quarterbacks, particularly when you have a coach who's not the age of, let's say, Sean McVay, when this dominance starts. If you have a coach who's in his late 50s, when your dominance begins, can you really realistically sit there and go, he'll be around for 20 years? No, I mean, that's probably one of the aspects that the Patriots that we underplayed over the course of a couple of decades was not just the rarity of a quarterback who plays till 45 at a high level. Obviously, didn't just with the Patriots, moved on to the Buccaneers, but let's say into his 40s at a high level. Did we really ever sit there and examine how many coaches get paired with that quarterback and actually last for 2 decades plus at a dominant level? It's even beyond just a quarterback playing in his 40s at a great level. Almost never do we see a coach who gets paired with that quarterback and lasts decades.
Yeah, coaches are cut from a different cloth for sure. I always look at it and say, man, at some point you're worth so much money and life just takes you to a spot where you're like, I don't need to deal with this anymore. We're all different. I just, there's just a level of you can only spend so much and the grind of coaching is so difficult. You just never know when the walk away point is for different coaches. Okay. We've talked a little bit about quarterbacks, but it's draft season. Now that we've put the Super Bowl in the past, we've got some quarterbacks to look at from the draft because Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are widely respected and expected to be the top 2 quarterbacks off the board. The question is, are they already slipping? We've got some thoughts on that. We'll break that down after a quick break. See, Rob, it's time for draft misinformation season. We all know it. I'm listening to mock drafts. We're all getting ready for the draft process. And Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are the 2 names that everybody's got their eyes on. And I know we've said this. I will say this again loudly. In a normal draft, if we were just in a vacuum, I don't believe that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are the same type of 1-2 quarterback in a draft that we've seen in years like we saw last year. These are not hot takes. I think that having Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders at the top of the draft, when you have draft-needy teams, quarterback-needy teams at the top of the draft, makes everybody do the math. But, man, I don't know. Just hear me out, C-Rob. Sometimes the hardest thing to do for your organization is the best thing to do for your organization. And that means even if you're desperate for a quarterback, I don't know that you necessarily fall over backwards for one of these quarterbacks. Just because you need one doesn't mean that you draft one this year because it may not be the right guy for your team. They may not even be worthy of the pick. And, man, I feel like you draft wrong at the quarterback position, everybody's getting fired.
Yeah, and I want to preface this by I see a lot of people out there talking about do you force the first round? Are we going back to the Kenny Pickett? Remember that Kenny Pickett draft? There was this idea that maybe Malik Willis could be a first round pick in that draft. And everyone said, look how horrible that quarterback draft turned out. The Steelers forced the Kenny Pickett selection and then they move on from him pretty quickly after a couple of seasons. I don't get the sense with Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, who's going to out of Ole Miss, who's going to be a name that we've already talked about on this show, who's going to continue to pick up momentum. I think as the process moves on, I don't think it's the same. I do think there is talent in this draft and in the first couple of players. I don't get the sense that it's just an absolute force to take Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders or even Jackson Dart in this early part of the process. What I do think is interesting, though, is maybe every year I forget a little bit, and I feel like it's always February. I always forget how much lying goes on in the process and how quickly that starts when the offseason begins. And I think the first thing really that caught me by surprise, I was talking to somebody in the New Orleans Saints organization about adding Kellen Moore as the head coach, kind of like, what happened in their coaching search process. And I had this moment where it was like, okay, maybe Derek Carr isn't ultimately going to be your quarterback there in New Orleans. Do you maneuver in this draft to potentially get QB1? Whether that's whether you view that as Cam Ward out of Miami, whether you view that as Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. And the response I got was, we're sitting at 9. We might have QB1 on the board at 9. We don't necessarily have to move if we feel like we want to make that addition in the draft at the quarterback position. We don't necessarily have to move. And immediately I thought, oh my God, does that mean that already is Cam Ward slipping? Is Shedeur Sanders slipping? Like, is this, is the quarterback landscape changing? And then, you're like, or am I being lied to? It's February. Is the lying process already started the second after you get out of the Super Bowl? I think it could be a little bit of both. I think we're starting to see the draft adjustment setting in for some of the rookie quarterbacks that we thought could happen in terms of these guys potentially slipping in this draft. But then also, I think there's some lying going on in the process because you basically have 9-10 teams trying to figure out their quarterback situation heading into free agency. There are going to be some veterans who are on the table here. And so for a team like, let's say, New Orleans at 9 in the draft, you're preserving really your options to move on from your veteran quarterback in the draft. But it's at the very least, we're entering into territory now that I think is going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of lies. You're going to hear things like, hey, the Jacksonville Jaguars got a call on Trevor Lawrence, which if you really want to get into that, we can get into that. How do you, let me ask you this, Fitz. This is so quintessential lying season in the NFL. You don't have a general manager. You're the Jacksonville Jaguars. You don't have a GM. You have a head coach who had a not great press conference, and Liam Cohen, Duval, weird, right? Which is fine. Dan Campbell, Nick Sirianni had weird intro press conferences. Liam Cohen is an unbelievable offensive game.
Oh, there we go.
God. I can't believe
well
you
done,
actually.
Stone.
Yeah, that's good. You pulled it up. Anyway, I don't know. It was a cringeworthy moment. There have been other very successful head coaches that have had cringeworthy moments in their intro press conference. Now, that said, Liam Cohen is not taking calls right now on Trevor Lawrence. Shad Khan, the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, is riding around on his $360 million yacht. He's not taking calls on on Trevor Lawrence. The Jacksonville Jaguars don't have a general manager, and the Pittsburgh Steelers apparently, supposedly, allegedly made a call on Trevor Lawrence. Okay, who did they call? They straight up call the owner because they didn't call the GM. There's no GM in place right now. I think it's quintessential February to me when you hear that oh my God, the Steelers inquired about Trevor Lawrence. Okay, how did that happen? Who realistically was taking that call? Is this? No, it's not real. It's funny to me, the things that start in February, and I think the Trevor Lawrence Pittsburgh Steelers storyline it epitomizes the lying season that really begins in February. And for all these people that are like, I literally had people going, is this real? I'm like, what GM was taking this call? Who's making the call right now? Like, let's go ahead and put aside the cap ramifications, which are absolutely, they're real. I mean, they're real, right? I mean, who took that call? Is Shad Khan sitting there taking calls on his yacht about Trevor Lawrence? No. Is Liam Cohen, who just got that job and walked in, taking calls on Trevor Lawrence? No. It doesn't mean that maybe the Steelers were not interested on some level. The Steelers could have been interested in a dozen quarterbacks, and all 12 of those quarterbacks could have had a storyline where the Steelers made a call. They're interested. Come on. Like, it's the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence Steelers storyline to me is the height of the offseason kicking in. That's it.
I think part of this, though, is because we've reached desperation mode, peak desperation mode for several franchises. And like, this is why I keep saying, okay, you've got the Giants and the Raiders near the top of the draft this year. And everybody knows that they need quarterbacks. But as I've said a million times to you, and I'll say again, just because you need a quarterback doesn't mean that the right quarterback is available for you right now.
Right.
And like, fans don't want to hear this, but my God, I will agree with you. These quarterbacks are better than Kenny Pickett. But the thing that I use Kenny Pickett as this example all the time. Y'all ready to spend the 4th or 6th overall pick in the draft, respectively, on a guy like Kenny Pickett? Because that is the thing that I think people keep forgetting in this process, is that if your favorite team is quarterback needy, but they look around and they're like, man, I don't know, that guy's no better than Will Levis. Like, you want Will Levis as your quarterback for the 6th overall pick? I sure as hell don't. So, like, I think this is the hard part about it, is that people in hell want ice water. Yeah, you got 2 teams near the top of the draft that need quarterbacks. Spectacular. That doesn't mean that they're going to draft quarterbacks this year, because frankly, that's a losing proposition. I would rather not draft a quarterback than draft wrong at the quarterback at the top of the first round.
Right. And here's the thing, too. And we have to keep this in mind anytime we go through this process. First and foremost, I think the thing that was alarming to me is that you have a number of teams that have the ability to draft a quarterback high. You mentioned the Raiders, you mentioned the Giants. We could talk about the Cleveland Browns. And when you do your due diligence in February, what you hear is a lot of, man, they're really working hard on veteran quarterbacks right now. Like, they're really, that to me was a little bit shocking. And particularly for, let's say, the Giants. The Giants, I think until we got into this month, I just thought, and I think a lot of people thought, well, they're in position to draft QB1. It's going to be Cam Ward or whatever. Like, they're either in position now, or they're going to be in position at some point in the draft process to take the quarterback that they want, whether it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. And then all of a sudden, the feedback that you get when you start doing this work is, man, they're working really hard on the veteran class of quarterbacks right now. And then you have to ask yourself, how do I process this? Does this mean that the rookies are slipping? And it could be, absolutely. There's no question in my mind that they've spent, the better part of months, scouting. They've gotten a good look at the rookie quarterback class, and they're saying, hey, there's going to be some solid veteran options here. Brian Daboll, the front office in New York, you're in a position where I don't think you can go 7-10 in 2025 and survive. Like, you probably need a 10-win season, right? So who's available for a 10-win season? Probably a rookie quarterback doesn't get you there. Instead, what you think is a veteran quarterback gets me there. So of the veteran quarterback options, let's say, and we'll get to this, let's say like Matt Stafford is suddenly an option for a number of NFL teams, including the New York Giants. You're going, does Matt Stafford get us to 10 wins faster than Cam Ward gets us to 10 wins? Does Matt Stafford maybe save our job in 2025 versus a rookie quarterback? Yeah, realistically, Matt Stafford, if you really need to win in 2025, Matt Stafford probably saves your job faster than any of these rookie quarterbacks. So I think that's some of what's going on, early in the process for the Cleveland Browns. I think there's some of what's going on, at least for the New York Giants. A little bit different, obviously, for the Raiders, because you've had change over there. You're not expecting the new regime with the Raiders to be a one-year situation. But again, I think a little bit of what's going to happen now moving forward is you're going to have some shine wear off of the rookie quarterbacks a little bit. And then I think you're going to have some veteran quarterbacks, whether it's Stafford, whether it's Darnold. I think, to me, what was really alarming in the process is we've talked for weeks now, if not months, about the Giants are going to take a quarterback. Like, they're going to be in position to take their quarterback in this draft. Even if it's not a great draft, at least it's a 2-quarterback draft, maybe a 3-quarterback draft, but definitely a 2-quarterback draft between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. The Giants are going to take one. The Raiders are going to take one. In February, so far, what I've heard for both franchises are veteran options. hey, the Giants may pursue. If Matt Stafford comes free, if he's really on his way out of the Los Angeles Rams at this stage, the Giants will have interest. The Raiders right now, Sam Darnold. If once Matt Stafford clears out of the trade market, free agency, whatever it ends up being, if he's not with the Rams, the next guy up is Sam Darnold. And you hear when you do work, Sam Darnold, very real option on the Raiders, horizon. And when you hear that, you go, is that a reflection of a weak rookie quarterback draft, or is it a reflection of good veterans that are out there right now, or situations where you got to win now in New York? Or for the Raiders, you're sitting there and going, the way Darnold played, is he not a better option at this age? He's still in his 20s, than going out and rolling the dice on a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders. And there's other things I think that are also playing into the potential for both those guys to slip. But it's very interesting what's going on right now, I think, with quarterbacks, particularly that rookie class.
If you're the Giants, could you be looking at a both situation? You acquire Stafford and then you draft a quarterback, you bench the quarterback eventually gets on the field.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't deny that. I can't deny that both the Giants, I think in some respects the Raiders, I think for most of these teams that are looking at quarterbacks, because of the age of a number of the players that could be on the market and resolutions, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's the Giants, the Raiders, I'll tell you what, I'll even pull up. I this morning I was like, let me run through a test with myself to see what I really truly think are quarterback options. So here's what it's 9 teams. I think realistically we have now settled into maybe 10, but at least 9. But we'll go with the 10. The Steelers, right? I mean, there's no question right now. I do think they're going to try and figure it out with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I'd be shocked if both leave that franchise. I do think there's a potential for at least one to return with the ability to compete as a starter. The Colts have already said they want to add somebody. The Jets, Aaron Rodgers is gone, so wide open. The Raiders, we talked about them. The Browns, we talked about them. The Titans, maybe Will Levis gets another shot in 2025, but I think there's no question the Titans want to add at the very least to that room. In the NFC, I think we talked about the Giants, we talked about the New Orleans Saints, the Vikings. I won't completely rule out Darnold there, because I do think there's a chance that the Vikings go out into free agency, kind of see what's available. If it's not as great as you think it ultimately could be, we will consider bringing you back at a more equitable rate for us if we feel like we can get you in the $35 to $40 million a year range. If we can get you back with maybe 2 years of guaranteed salary, that gives us a longer runway ultimately with JJ McCarthy. I can't rule out ultimately that Sam Darnold ends up back in play for the Vikings over time. But I mean, really, that's 9 teams in the NFL right now that are going to sit there and they're going to stare at these veteran free agent options or the trade options before they really get to the draft.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. I want to ask you about Aaron Rodgers, because you mentioned him, of course, and because I feel like we just have to talk about Aaron Rodgers. But more importantly, if Stafford isn't going to be a Ram, who the hell is going to be the Rams quarterback? We'll take a quick break and I'll ask that. See, Rob, if not Stafford, then who? Like, if you're the Rams and you think Matt Stafford is not where things are going to be, like, what's their quarterback situation? Because if it's a bad year to need a quarterback, it's a bad year to need a quarterback. If I'm the Rams, I don't want to pay Stafford. But my God, what's my other alternative? Like Daniel Jones? I'm not excited about that.
It's the Stafford situation with the Rams. I really, truly believe now that we've gotten beyond the Super Bowl, you start to dial in free agency, you start to look at the draft, and you go, okay, well, who's the number one domino? Who's everybody kind of waiting on right now? And I think it's Stafford with the Rams. I don't think there's any question that both teams are staring at the Rams and going, what's going to ultimately happen with this guy? Is he really going to be freed up? And then I think agents who have quarterbacks in the process are sitting there and saying, I will know the landscape once I know whether or not Matt Stafford is going to be with the Los Angeles Rams, or if he's potentially the answer for, the Pittsburgh Steelers for a season or somewhere else. Stafford is the first big domino right now in free agency, trades, the draft, the quarterback situation in general. Everyone's waiting to figure out exactly what's going to happen. Now, what I think is interesting with Stafford inside the Rams, I think there's differing opinions on, what his horizon is with the Rams, depending on who you talk to. I think Sean McVay at this stage, I think McVay would be happy to have Matt Stafford back, although I think finances play into this. How much money are you ultimately going to pay Matt Stafford moving forward? And then number two, I think McVay wants to get beyond this sort of, okay, we're going to do this every offseason, or we're going to have he wants an answer, right? And I think he wants an answer beyond 2025. So if Stafford comes back, I think McVay would embrace that, and if Stafford stays in place with the Rams. But I also think Sean McVay would like to know, hey, Matt Stafford's going to be here in 2025. He's going to be here in 2026. We know that we have more than year-to-year conversation with this player. I think there's a little bit of frustration there when it comes to the coaching staff of, let's not do this every offseason where we're constantly asking ourselves, is Matt Stafford ultimately going to be back? I think this is the offseason. They want to get beyond that. Either they want to know Stafford's going to be in place for a couple of seasons, or it's time to move on and kickstart their process, maybe with a younger player at the quarterback position. So I do think that's a little bit of the crossroads that's going on with the Rams right now. Now, if they move on from Matt Stafford, as you said, the question is, what are you moving on for? And I think there are a few different options in play. I do think Sam Darnold, depending on what his options are on the table, I can't rule out Sam Darnold potentially in play for the Los Angeles Rams. I can't rule out Jackson Dart, the Ole Miss quarterback.
Why do I feel like that's such a smart, Jackson Dart falls mid-first rounder, Rams move up a little bit, McVay gets his guy, young guy. It just feels like one of those things you and I are going to be doing the draft, and I'm just going to say, son of a biscuit, how does it always work out for certain teams?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I'm familiar enough with Jackson Dart at this stage to go, oh, wow, the Rams, look at the Rams result.
No, but McVay gets him and it feels right. McVay gets him and it feels good. You're right, but McVay gets him and it feels good.
I feel like any quarterback that ends up in the hands of Sean McVay, I suddenly feel better about that quarterback.
100%.
Yeah, than I did before. So if the Rams, whether they moved up or whether they, wherever, let's say it is Jackson Dart, they get him moving up in the draft, they get him at 20, whatever. I mean, wherever they would get a Jackson Dart, I would be like, oh, Jackson Dart. All of a sudden, there's some shine there because Matt, Sean McVay ultimately chose him basically over a Matt Stafford at this point. There must be a reason for that, and I'm intrigued. So, I can't rule out ultimately that Dart is. There's no doubt heading into the Senior Bowl, he was a person that was already picking up momentum. Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl director, talked about when he added him to the Senior Bowl, he can't remember a quarterback ever getting the amount of traction across the league in terms of a quarterback addition to the Senior Bowl that Jackson Dart did. So he added some buzz and momentum to Jackson Dart's name heading into that situation.
That's a sneaky power of Jim Nagy, by the way. Jim has the ability to make sure that certain guys at the Senior Bowl just get a little bit more hype coming out. That's all
definitely. Yeah, that definitely. Announcing that the number of people across the league that contacted Jim Nagy when he added Jackson Dart certainly added some momentum to Jackson Dart's name. No question about that. But again, when we go back to the Rams and what the resolution ultimately is, man, I just, it's hard for me truly, honestly, to believe the Rams are going to depart the situation they have right now with Matt Stafford for like a 1-year bridge option. You will hear, hey, maybe Aaron Rodgers, like where could Aaron Rodgers go? He's not going to have a lot of options necessarily on the table. Maybe Aaron Rodgers, who McVay has been interested in the past. There's no question about that. Aaron Rodgers, who I think played better over the second half of the 2024 season. You could make the argument that, okay, 2 years removed from the Achilles injury, you would expect a player in year one coming off the Achilles not going to be as good as what they would be in year two. Okay, well, what's the data on a player being as old as Aaron Rodgers coming off of an Achilles injury? I think that corrupts that sort of mindset. But when I sit there and I'm like, okay, well, if you don't want a year-to-year situation with Matt Stafford, are you really going to enter into a year-to-year situation now with Aaron Rodgers, or maybe just a 1-year scenario with Aaron Rodgers? I think you only do that if you really don't have any other options on the table that are enticing to you. And maybe ultimately that's the case. Maybe Sam Darnold's too expensive. Maybe Jackson Dart over the course of this draft process really heats up, and all of a sudden, he's not a guy that gets past the mid-teens, and are you going to invest that kind of capital to try and go up and get him? And then next thing you know, you're sitting there and you're staring at Aaron Rodgers going, he really has no other place to go. We can make it work for a 1-season scenario. I wouldn't rule that out completely for the Rams, but there's no doubt across the league, everyone's staring at Matt Stafford and going, what's going to happen with that? How is that going to resolve itself? Where else could he potentially end up? And then that's where the other dominoes in the quarterback market start to fall into place in March.
I need Aaron Rodgers to be the quarterback of the Tennessee Titans next year. I've decided this because, look, the Titans are as close to invisible as an NFL franchise can be. Like, I mean no disrespect to the Titans, but they ask me all the time, like, why does ESPN hate the Titans? My answer is they don't. The Titans just don't move the needle, right? Like, so nobody ever talks about the Titans because nobody ever cares, right? I get that. They have the first pick in the draft. And I think, if you just went up to a bunch of casual fans right now, there's a ton of people that would be like, oh, really? Tennessee has it? Like, it just doesn't have the same. So look, if there's any one market that I think that Aaron Rodgers could go to, and frankly, people would just not care, I think it's Tennessee. I let him go to the Titans. Let him, talk his talk there. The Titans won't care. The world won't care. It'll be basically invisible. He can be a bridge gap quarterback. The Titans can figure out what they're doing next.
Well, no, he's not really. I don't think he can be choosy. This isn't, a few years ago where Aaron Rodgers could still have the potential to sit there and go, well, let me decide where I want to go. No, your options on the table are going to be limited. And as I said, we talked about, I think it was like 9 teams. We talked about, you're not going to be in play for all 9 of those teams. There's going to be a handful of teams. And the Titans, I think sitting at 1 are not locked in on absolutely taking a quarterback. I think there's no question in my mind when the draft process is over. If they see an elite edge rusher, they will take that player. If they sit there and look at Travis Hunter and they say, you know what? How many times does someone come down the pipeline where they could be a full-time corner, moonlight as a wide receiver, and be impactful in both situations? Or maybe they even sit there and go, maybe he's wide receiver 1. Maybe this guy's the next Justin Jefferson. There's some comps there that you will hear people across the league make to Travis Hunter when it comes to body, catch radius, his ability to adjust, kind of what he brings to the table offensively. That it's spare. I would say more teams view him as a corner than a wide receiver, but the teams that love him as a wide receiver, the comps are pretty crazy on Travis Hunter when you start to walk them down that avenue. So maybe the Titans take a Travis Hunter at number 1. And then to me, as you said, I think there's no question they still add to the quarterback room there. And maybe Will Levis gets his shot again with the new front office regime. Obviously, Brian Callahan, the head coach, is still there, but maybe the new front office says, all right, well, let's see. Levis, from a tool standpoint, is as good as anything we could get out of this draft. But I could still see them ultimately adding a veteran. And to me, depending on how all the seats unfold, where certain guys end up, Rodgers may not have any other options other than maybe a Tennessee on a 1-year situation. So, yeah, I could see him ultimately end up in Tennessee. And I think your read on it is completely correct. He could go in there, do his thing, be on the McAfee show. All of the extra kind of shenanigans that go on with Aaron Rodgers, I think probably fly in Tennessee. I don't think they fly in like let's say like LA. If he's a Ram for 1 year, I think it's a different dynamic than if he's a Titan.
I just look around and like I'm not being Debbie Downer here. I'm just ever the realist at the quarterback position. So for me, as ever the realist, I keep looking around and I think, all right, the Saints are going to realize they're just sort of stuck with Derek Carr for a year. The Rams are going to figure it out with Stafford because they don't want any chance that they get stuck without anything. So Sam Darnold ends up back in Minnesota, even though Vikings fans have told me I've lost my mind. And we're going to end up with, as all these dominoes fall, a couple of kids in the draft that are not particularly, I don't think, world beaters, and a lot of franchises that will look around saying, Jameis Winston, Daniel Jones, is that what we're doing for a year? Like, I just think that we're gonna look around in 3 months and everyone's gonna feel wildly overwhelmed.
Killing the offseason already. Fitz, you're killing the offseason quarterback.
The quarterback carousel is going to run flat. Nobody's going to be happy. And this is going to be like the equivalent of a middle school dance where every time the music plays, you got stuck with the one girl you didn't want to dance with. That's what every single team is going to have by the end of all of this. And then we're just going to sit there and say, well, that was wholly underwhelming. Like, that's my glorious prediction.
Spoken like a man who had a lot of options at the middle school dances.
I did not. Fat kid that played the violin. Like a fat kid that played the violin didn't get a lot of options at the middle school dance. There's no.
You're right, though. I mean, like it's more often than not, the NFL teams will stick with what they know versus what they don't. They don't like uncertainty, and so if we sat here and you told me, "Hey, Darnold will be back in Minnesota on a 1 year," on the tag for some reason. Let's say, JJ McCarthy lost a ton of weight after the surgery, and that set him back. And so it's kind of like, the rookie season in 2024, that's extended now into 2025. So Sam Darnold ends up back there. Stafford, family situation, likes LA, it ultimately works out where Stafford stays put. Carr in New Orleans, the cap hits the cap hit. Kellen Moore's not super excited to necessarily have this guy as his starting quarterback in 2025, but cap is cap. And that's a guy you really didn't think you could move off of prior to 2025. I could see us sitting here. It would be super boring. I could see us sitting here entering the draft at the end of April going, well, geez, all the quarterbacks kind of stayed put. And the one guy who really became the belle of the ball because the Jets were like, no, we're not doing this, was Aaron Rodgers. I could see that ultimately happening. Wouldn't be exciting. Fitz is throwing cold water on, all of the potential friction we could have in March. One way or another, we're going to know. I'll say this, like when we come out of the combine, we get into mid-March, this will sort itself out pretty quickly. I don't think we're going to sit here and go, oh, the Stafford thing's lingering into the, late into the offseason. No, none of these teams really want this to linger. They want to have this settled pretty quickly and know what track they're going to be on. I expect by the beginning of April, we're going to know 100% who's drafting a quarterback in the NFL draft, just based on what they did in free agency or didn't do in free agency in the trade market in March.
So right now, if you had to, these are way too early best guesses.
Sure. Yeah.
Who's the Giants quarterback next year?
Man, this was such an easy answer for me like a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But then the Giants are working much more on the veteran options than I expected in February. I will say I still believe, and this is me believing, that people lie to you in February and even into March and into April. I think there's a lot of lying that goes on. So I still believe ultimately that, Cam Ward ends up being that guy for the Giants, only because I assume what I'm hearing right now about how hard they're working on the potential veteran options. Maybe it's going to be Matt Stafford. I have to assume that that's just lies that are happening right now, but I can't rule out the stunner of, let's say, a Matt Stafford ending up with the New York Giants and them kicking the process at quarterback down the road a little bit longer, because they know, I think you have a head coach who knows, I really need to do something in 2025. I can't have a 7-10 season in 2025. I need to have a 10-7 season to preserve my job. Matt Stafford does that, I think, beyond Cam Ward.
So who is the Raiders quarterback?
I think it might be Darnold. I really do. I
should I be happy about that, C-Rob? Like, I feel joy to that. Like, yeah. I'm sorry. Like, I think there's a lot worse options at this point than what we saw this year from Sam Darnold.
I think so. I think the scenario to me that's really intriguing about Darnold is, let's say you sign a Sam Darnold and you do, let's say it's a 4-year deal, right? I'm projecting here, but let's say it's a 4-year deal. I'll split the baby. Instead of getting to 50 annual average value, but getting beyond 40, let's say it's 45, right? So it's a 4-year deal, $180 million. So he's making $45 million annual average value. Let's say he's getting 2 years of guaranteed salary, which is what I expect. So really it's a 2-year deal with Sam Darnold, 2 years, $90 million, right? And then all of a sudden at the number 6 pick, maybe you take Ashton Genty. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, okay, Darnold, Bowers, Genty, who I think is an immaculate prospect in this draft. It's rich taking him at 6, but I also think he's the type of running back who potentially could really warrant that kind of draft investment. I don't know. Like, I'm kind of down for that, with the changes that have happened, obviously with the coaching staff. But I don't think do I think he's going to be Sam Darnold's borderline MVP prospect with the Raiders? No, because you're taking a lot of the surrounding pieces away from him. But I think it's a hell of a start if Genty ends up being your pick at number 6 and you sign Sam Darnold to what's effectively a 2-year contract to see where this ultimately goes. I'd feel pretty good about that, honestly.
I'm ready to run through walls. That's what's happened on Friday. Now I'm ready to run through walls. Playoffs next year. That's what I heard. C-Rob said the Raiders are going to make the playoffs next year and the Chiefs are about to fall apart. That's the way I heard this whole show. That's all I took away from this entire show. And that's why I got the joy down in my heart. What I know is that you should follow us on social media, at Charles Robinson, at Jason Fitz. You know the drill. If you follow us, you'll keep all the great work of C-Rob out there, as there is no offseason. Well, there is. It's just not yet. The offseason's not until after the NFL draft. He's going to keep pounding the pavement to make sure that you stay as informed as possible, and I'm going to make sure that I'm here just being pretty. That's my main role. Rate, review, subscribe. If you've listened this far, we appreciate you taking the time to do it. We are back Tuesdays and Fridays all the way to the draft. Nothing is changing. We are too excited to take any time off. There's too much to get to, so we will be back with you as we have been. Tuesdays, Fridays is where we will be twice a week, as always. We appreciate you guys hanging out so much. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy your weekend.